Welcome to In This Body, the online event to support parents and caregivers with staying regulated and connected even when things get intense. And today I'm honored to have Bonnie Sheldon with me. Hi, Bonnie.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm really glad you're here with us. Bonnie is an integrative somatic practitioner with more than 4 decades of experience in movement, embodiment, and mind-body healing. Her early training with Morsch Feldenkrais, Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen, Body-Mind Centering, and Irmar Bartenieff through the
Bartinieff, that's right.
Bartinieff, okay, through the Levan Bartinieff Institute, shaped the foundation of her work, which began in private practice in 1978. Over the years, she has integrated TRE, yoga, pranayama, EFT, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and trauma-sensitive somatic coaching into a deeply compassionate, nervous system-centered approach. A former priest of Trinity Cathedral, Miami, she brings a grounded spiritual presence to her work with individuals and groups. She is the founder of Bonnie Sheldon Somatics and Healing Arts, where she supports clients in reconnecting with their body's wisdom and resilience. Thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure to join you and join this conversation.
Yeah. So tell us more about who you are and the work you do. Uh, I'm really interested in also in hearing on how you started with everything. Your bio is so rich. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yes, I've done a lot of things. I've been privileged to have a lot of opportunities, and it really all started way, way back in the womb when I was born with a what we used to call a birth defect, but is a congenital disability now. And then I had traumatic surgery at age 4. And this is way back when people didn't know anything about vagus nerves or anything that would go wrong. And so I had a lot of pain and a lot of dysfunction early in life. And my two parents were university professors, and their attitude was, well, get on with it anyway, Bonnie. They were not going to put up with too much. And so I just kept moving. I danced and I did every possible thing I could to deal with the pain, not really understanding what was going on. And I loved dance. And so then when I went on to college, which I was in the first class of women at Princeton, which was an amazing experience, I discovered that I was only an hour away from the world's largest dance capital. And so I started commuting and training in dance and dance with some of the world's largest ballet companies. And I was referred to some movement specialists. And at that time, we didn't even have a word for somatics. It was just people who studied movement. And those were the names that we just mentioned. Moshe Feldenkrais, who is one of the, somatic pioneers. And at that time in New York, there was a nexus of people who were looking at movement and talking about it in different ways. And it developed for me a template of being able to look at the body and experience the body from within, which is what we now think of as embodiment, is experiencing life from within our body and ourselves, incorporating all the parts of ourselves that might be. And so then I went on and I danced and I choreographed and I taught. I taught choreography at Juilliard. I was a dance therapist at Bellevue, and I started a wonderful K through 12 program at a Quaker school for both movement and dance. And I just loved it all. But then I got married and I decided I'd like to make some money. So I went into business and I worked for the world's largest ad agency, Young and Rubicam Brands. And I brought a lot of products over out into the market and worked on brands. But I always felt I wanted to work with people. And so I went back to theology school. And I became an Episcopalian minister for many years, working out of Trinity Cathedral. And then I began to have health problems, and I'd always had a parallel theology. My husband had become an initiative, a guru back way, way when, and he'd been at the ashram in India way, way early on. And I met that individual, and I became interested in that system of study and the chakras, and I became aware of the meridians, and I became aware of a whole other paradigm of living and being and looking at the body, and I wanted to explore that. And so I resigned my ordination in a very friendly way and began to explore and discovered Reiki. And then I found EFT, which is emotional freedom techniques. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's a system that was developed some years ago now by a man named Gary Craig. And he used something called thought field therapy, which used the acupuncture, Chinese traditional medicines, lines of energy that flow through the body and give us our life force. And we know that there are certain junctures of these meridians on the hands, the face, and the torso that when we say scripted words with those, we can actually change the neural pathways in our brains and reduce our cortisol hormone, which is our stress hormone, change different path brain waves. And so we found efficacy. Now there are over 300 studies and many, many studies. It's been around for a while. That it's a very efficacious technique for everything from weight loss to PTSD to anxiety. And so I am now a master trainer. I help other people who would like to become EFT practitioners. I use it in my own work. And I also use somatics, which is the body and working with the body within. So
Mm.
that's a very short version of it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Like, I feel it's a very, very interesting life that you've had, and uh, you bring in so much wisdom from all those different experiences that you've been through. Uh, I I want to go back to that part when you said when you started working with movement experts and they gave you a template.
Yes.
Uh, if I was intrigued, but okay, what does that mean exactly?
Well, when you're learning ballet in those days, this is back when, now there's been convergence and dance has evolved very much, but you very much learn by how you looked. How do we look? There's a mirror and you try to achieve perfection. And if you can get your knee up to your ear and you have a perfect extension, that's ideal. And how that felt was not too important. And when you're dancing on your big toe, that is not something that the big toe was necessarily made to do. Nor is, and I'm not saying anything bad about ballet or training, but many of these techniques are not actually natural to the human body. The history of ballet was it was developed back in the days of courts when women wore corsets. So all that initially moved were the limbs, and the torso didn't move at all, which is not how the human body moves. So in learning ballet, if it's not taught properly, which for me was unfortunately the case back in Wisconsin when I first started, many times when we would do the arches, we develop then a flat back. And the body accommodates to do these formal positions, and they're not necessarily healthful. And that's what happened to me is my body was saying no to some of these positions. And I went and studied with people who taught me that the first place to find out about my body was to be very still and move very slowly and see what it had to say. And instead of telling my body, as in, and I love yoga and I'm a trained yoga teacher as well, try to do this or try to achieve that, say, if I roll over, what part rolled first and what did that feel like and why? And did I have a memory associated with that? And if so, what was that? Now, this is a very advanced explanation of what would come over many steps, but that's sort of what that is about, is finding out what the body has to say and listening to the body and letting that rule the decisions that might be made. And not the body is not always the wisest, but our experience of life comes first from sensation, then comes thought, then comes emotion, and then comes behavior. And if we don't connect to that first sensation or become aware of from that we're having a thought, we may act out of emotion. And we know because if we change our minds, emotions can change. If we're basing our actions on something that's changeable, it's not necessarily a solid basis for decision making. So tracing ourselves back to that place where we can find our inner wisdom gives us an opportunity to pause and reflect. And that's the template that I was talking about. So when I encountered serious illness and I was given medical diagnoses serially that said I would die within 6 months, many times with systemic sclerosis, I looked at my body and I said, is this really what's happening? I'm not saying there was anything wrong. Those people saved my life in many ways, but there are complementary, we call it now, or alternative ways to look. And the body has many messages. And I asked my body, what were those messages? And I had people who are wise enough to help me decipher them because it's not always easy to know. So that's what I meant by, is that, I don't know, is that clear?
Yeah, yeah, and it clarifies a lot of questions. I like how you bring in listening to the body and starting with the sensations rather than the thoughts or the emotions.
Well, I think that's the really the first thing that we need to recognize when we're talking about embodiment is what actually is embodiment. For me, embodiment is living from within the body, listening to the body's signals, responding before a crisis happens, responding out of thought, emotion, or just the gestalt of the moment, but really finding the body's wisdom and then having the time or taking a second to just pause. We had mentioned possibly talking about techniques or things we might use, and this might be a good moment when we're talking, and before we even get into substantive conversation, is when you're caregiving either a child or a parent or someone else you're caregiving for, and the things can build up into overwhelm, and we can talk about how overwhelm builds, but we're at that point of overwhelm, and what do we do at that moment? And there's a marvelous technique called Havening that was developed by the Peaceful Heart Network when they were out in Rwanda and dealing with these big crises moments. What do you do? And one of the easiest things to do is to take a breath and just softly take a second. Just, and if you have that sensation, that ability, imagining a pearl in your hand,
Mm.
and it just drops the energy right down. And so you just, when you're about to go, oh, okay, maybe not.
Mm.
That for me is how embodiment can pay off in daily living.
Yeah, yeah, and such a simple act, just slowing down and yeah, it's such a simple
And
technique.
no one knows what you're doing.
Mhm, mhm. Wow, wow. Uh, I love that you mentioned the Heart Math Institute because it's I love the work that they do and how they talk about the energy field of the heart and how you can bring in coherence to your field, but also to the field of other people around you, which is so important for a parent, especially with kids around them. Um,
Yeah, I think that the greatest gift a child can receive is a regulated caregiver. A caregiver, maybe not every minute, of course, because who could possibly achieve that, but someone who is aware of that issue and is working towards regulation. And what happens with heart math is we've discovered that the heart can project 10 feet in terms of energy. So if we have an agitated mom who's fairly agitated, the child is going to, reflect that and come coversely, the mother will then respond to the child's agitation. So if we begin with thinking about what is overwhelm, is that a good place to take the
yes, yes,
conversation? Is
yeah.
what really happens when we're overwhelmed? Is it's not psychological. Is if a mom snaps at a child suddenly, a child says something and the mom snaps at the child, and then they feel guilty, of course, right? Immediately you feel guilty. And then that proceeds and there's all sorts of behavior that falls out of that. But it's important for the mom and for everyone to understand that that is a neurological reaction, not a psychological reaction. And there were things that built up to that moment before, as we were talking about the sensation and what then that leading to thought and emotion. And so when we're talking about overwhelm, it's not a weakness. It's our nervous system responding to too much input. And it can be a lot of different input. It can be loud music. It can be, four teenagers ignoring us and on the screen, and you're trying to get dinner on. It's just too much input. And the body will signal first in a variety of ways. And there are ways we can recognize that. But the body knows that we're in overwhelm before the mind does. And the mind often jumps to the emotion of frustration. Okay, the kids are all on the screen. The body is saying, I'm neurologically overloaded. I don't know how to do with this. But what comes up is the emotion of frustration and then behavior that relates to the frustration and doesn't deal with the dysregulation or actually what's going on. So some signs for what's happening when we're in overwhelm. Would that be helpful?
Yes, yes.
Is when we're starting to feel overwhelmed as caregivers or parents or just people, some signs are our jaw starts to tighten. Does that sound familiar, right?
Mhm.
Or our shoulders lift. Okay, kids. Or our breathing shortens, or it comes up. Our breathing comes up. Or we're starting just breathing in our chest, not deeper breathing. We just start to feel that. Or we feel suddenly very fatigued, like, oh no, I can't go on. And our body's not tired. It's a physiological reaction that we're in overwhelm. Or we get very irritable when we're not irritable people. And it's actually not psychological. It's our nervous system responding. Or we can just be in sensory overload. We stop hearing. Kids are shouting and we don't hear it. It's over. Dogs out in the street, we don't know. We're in sensory overload. Or we just can't think clearly and we make bad decisions. And that can happen a lot. So that story we told about the mom who snapped at the child, an alternative story would be a mom who's experiencing a lot of stomach distress and she doesn't listen. She drives her kids to soccer practice or wherever she's going, and she's on automatic pilot because that's what she needs to get through. And she's ignoring her stomach pain. And finally, she does listen to her stomach pain. And she notices that it always comes up when she's dropping her son off at a particular friend's house. Well, that's strange, isn't it? Why is my stomach? Suddenly, she's listening to that signal. So she takes a minute and she says to her son, are you cool with this? Are you friends with Harry? Do you like coming over? And her son says, no, he's always hitting on me. Oh. So the mom's coherence, that heart coherence, that physiological coherence we were talking about, was actually speaking to her. She felt her son's discomfort. She felt it in her body. She took a moment to pause and regulate and think about that. And lo and behold, she found out something that help and allowed her to help her son not have that experience. So we do have tools when this happens. And I don't know if you want to ask some questions or I can suggest some tools.
Y- Yeah, it's so empowering when you know that these kind of energy, like the energy coherence, it exists, it's there, and it's available for us to connect with our loved ones. Uh,
It's always there. And if they are loved ones, that love is always there too. And that emotion is just on top. And
mm,
so the key is then to not react. That's where the mindfulness comes in, is to take that step back and pause, if possible. And if you're going to react in a way that will be helpful.
mm,
So I wanted to suggest, I mentioned the havening, and there are a couple of other havening techniques from the Peaceful Heart Network. One of them is just to very slowly, just another calming thing.
mm.
Kids are going nuts. Now, there's also self-stroking, which is wonderful when you need it. Oh, I'm locking myself in the bathroom for a while and give myself a hug. That's good too. That's another overwhelm technique, but just for the moment or when you need it most immediately. And when something comes up, the first thing to do is not necessarily intervene, like grab the kid, right? Reach towards the kid is a soothing approach. Maybe the kid doesn't immediately want to be hugged when they're hurt. Is, hi, oh, I'm sorry that happened to you. Because what do you need? What can I help? Is you need a kiss? You need a big hug? Is the softer the approach, the softer the response and the better response. Now, for the caregiver, what EFT I mentioned is on the face and the hands, and we don't have time now to go through what all that might be, but we can use those points for breath just to calm ourselves down. And we know these points are universal because we've discovered over the years that the points that we're talking about are points that people have been using for years. The top of the head, which we use, oh no, the inner eye that we use. How could you do this to me? They're all points that people have been using for centuries. So the top of the head, if things are getting hot and heavy and you just want to pop into, I keep saying the bathroom or the bedroom, or you want to step away out onto the patio for a minute, just the top of the head. And I invite anyone here to who might want to just try this for a minute, is just either tapping with 2 or 3 fingers or just pressing and just breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. Yeah, and just breathe in and breathe out. And then I happen to like the optional point, the third eye point. And breathing in and breathe out. And by that time, things are pretty much starting to cool off, right? And the inner eye can be one hand or two, breathing in and breathing out. And you don't have to do all the points, just one point can be enough. I happen to like the heart. The other points, just to follow that, would be the under eye point, the nose point, the chin point, and then the chest point, and to finish the underarm point. And we start in the side of the hand. But I often find this is a lymph point or the heart point. Just here and a little breathing can be very helpful. So I think that people and parents are in overwhelm often and facing that because they care so much and they're always caring for others. And the step into embodied caregiving is to start to begin to care for ourselves and themselves. And that's really the biggest step and the most help that can help the child or the patient receiving the care.
Yes, so true, so true. We cannot give from an empty cup, or if we're running on just low capacity. Um, yeah, uh, it's very interesting how, these points are sort of universal as well. Um, and what would your tips be for someone who is maybe who has not heard of tapping before and is like reluctant? Does this really work? Um, do I really need to spend time doing this? Is there a quicker way or
Well, I believe tapping works, and I
yeah.
think it's worth the time to learn it. But that's my personal proclivity, and there are many other things we can do. Of course, everyone knows take a time out, take a walk in nature is, of course, very always very helpful. But I think the main thing is the recognition that these emotional responses are not emotions that need to be judged, but are coming out of deeper physiological react. It's biological logic. The body's going to build up and explode in some way. And if it's possible, even without knowing this or having a belief in something called Havening or EFT, if it's possible to begin to take a pause before reacting, just the thought that maybe my emotion isn't true. Maybe my thought about this isn't even true. If I can change my mind, maybe thoughts don't always have truth. And so my reaction might best be calm and balanced. Well, I think this through.
Hmm.
Well, my child calms down or my patient calms down, or well, I calm down. Let me take a pause. That pause is life-saving.
Yes, it is. It is. And I always invite people to try a tool out before judging it. So, like, really try an EFT tapping practice and then see the results. Um,
Yes, it's almost in science now shows that in a 1 45-minute session can reduce the stress hormone cortisol by 43%. I mean that's amazing. I see my clients go from totally red face to just, oh, okay. So yeah, I do encourage tapping and mindfulness work and somatics because even though tapping is a somatic technique, the full body likes to participate too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh, this has been like wonderful. Uh, is there anything else you'd like to add before I just invite you to talk more about how other people can reach you and
I think the thing that I'd like to add is always a little self-compassion, a little kindness when things get tough. Is most people are doing their best.
mm,
And, not every kid turns out exactly the way we thought they might in a million ways. So removing the expectation of the results, living with what is, making what is as good as it can be with as much love as possible and acceptance, and then forgiving oneself for whatever is happening. It's not always anyone's fault. It's a lot of factors.
yeah, yeah, so true, so true. Oh, amazing wisdom in just those words, compassion and forgiving oneself. Yes, yeah, yeah. Uh, so I know that you offer people a very beautiful gift. If you want to share more about that.
Yes, I'm happy to share that. I have a lovely, well-formatted PDF that you can receive. That's Tap into Calm, which is how to not just tap using EFT, but how to access calm in everyday and even more complex situations with a full EFT tapping chart and some somatic exercises. And you can find that by signing up on my website for my various offerings, which include an upcoming book and a new article series that I'm very excited about.
Yeah, yeah. I'll put the link to your website below this recording. Uh, thank you
Yeah,
so much.
oh yes, that would be www.bonniesheldon.com. BONNIESHELDON.com.
Yes, yeah.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much for that.
Thank you for the opportunity and for everyone who's listening and struggling with these cares.
Mm, mm. Uh, one last thing to add before we just say goodbye. One last like quick thing to add
One
on
last
just
quick thing. Bless you all who are trying and working in this day and age to care for children and care for anyone you're in a caregiving situation. These are not easy days. The rules haven't been written for today, and we're kind of making them up as we go along. So I just like to add a blessing to everyone who's making that great effort is go for it and thank you. You're making the next generations.
Thank you.
You're welcome.